Greg was a nature enthusiast who loved capturing beautiful sightings with his drone. He would often go to the forest and fly his drone over the trees. But today, something happened that he couldn't explain. And when he looked at the footage he had captured that day, his mouth fell open with shock. But he never realized the consequences it could bring. Before we start, can we get this video to 1,000 likes? Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Greg pressed play and watched as the footage he had captured today played on his laptop. His drone fell from the sky earlier today, and this was the first time he could look back at what he had captured. But he never expected to see this. His eyes widened as he came closer to the screen. There, for a split second, he saw something he had never seen before. He rewound the footage and played it again and again, but the footage stayed the same. A mixture of shock and excitement rushed through his body. This could be the discovery of a lifetime, or at least if this was what he thought it was. And there was only one way he could find out. But what did Greg see in the forest? And how did he even capture those creatures? Greg had always loved the woods. He had grown up exploring the forests near his home and had a deep appreciation for all of the different species that called it home. As he got older, he became an avid explorer and nature photographer, using his drone to capture beautiful landscapes and document the different animals he encountered. One day, while capturing the forest from his drone, the connection suddenly disappeared. His screen went dark and his drone fell from the sky. He watched from afar as his drone disappeared through the treetops and quickly got into his car. He wasn't sure where his drone was, but he had to find it fast. The thought of his drone lying shattered on the ground rushed through his head. He had to be there before someone else took it home. This was his first drone, and it was very expensive. He can't afford to buy a second one. Greg got out of his car once he thought he was near the crash site and started searching. He searched and searched, and after a while, he finally saw his drone lying on the ground. He ran to it, fell to his knees, and picked up the drone. The damage seemed to be minor. Only a few wings were broken off, and there was a little crack in the camera lens. Greg brushed the leaves off the drone and put it in the back of his car. Then he drove home, hoping to salvage the footage he had captured that day. But when he got home and tried to turn the drone on, nothing happened. Greg sighed as his hope slowly disappeared. There was one other option for him to see if his footage had survived. He had to plug his drone directly into his computer. But in order to do this, he needed a special cord. Greg knew he had that cord somewhere in his room, but couldn't remember where. So he started looking around and found it surprisingly fast. He plugged his drone into his computer and watched as a pop-up opened. The footage he had captured that day started playing immediately. First, he saw his drone going up and flying over the forest. Then it suddenly went dark, and he figured that would be where the footage ended, but it didn't. His drone captured something as it fell from the sky. Greg rewound the footage and watched it again. He saw the forest from above. Then the screen went dark, and then the drone started capturing again, but it moved very fast. The footage was only a second long, so Greg had to edit it to play in slow motion. Greg played the clip again and watched closely as the slow motion footage played. He couldn't believe his eyes. There was definitely something there. Two somethings, maybe more. He couldn't be sure. They were like nothing Greg had ever seen. He had to know what they were. What were these creatures? Could it be an undiscovered species? There was only one way to find out. He had to go back out. Greg knew that if he wanted answers, he'd have to go back to the woods. He wanted to leave right then, but it was getting dark and the woods could be dangerous. He had to wait, but there was something he could do in the meantime. Even though he'd have to wait until morning to go back out into the woods, he might be able to get some help from his friends in the area. He posted the 2-second clip of the creatures to his social media and asked if anyone else had seen these things. Someone had to have seen them too. Greg also thought a bit about showing off. After all, this was his first drone, and to have captured something so incredible was truly amazing. Surely his friends would like to see what he discovered, and maybe they could help him too. In the meantime, he'd have to wait. Greg had no idea what the consequences of his actions would be, but he knew that he had to get back out into the woods. It was dark now, so he went to bed. But the first thing the next morning, Greg got up, packed his drone, and head out to the woods with a sense of adventure and excitement. He was going to make a big discovery. Greg had always loved exploring the unknown. He'd been hiking and traveling all over as his life could afford to, and now that he had his first drone, he was thrilled to be on the edge of adventure again. The idea of discovering a new species filled him with a sense of pride and purpose, but he had to find them again. As Greg walked deeper into the woods, he noticed that the trees were getting taller and the underbrush was getting thicker. This was close to where he was when he'd caught the creatures on camera. It was time to get out his drone and see what he could find. But what would he find? He slowed down and tried to be as quiet as possible. There came a rustling from up ahead. He quickly set up the drone and launched it, sending it over the bushes ahead, trying to catch a glimpse of what was making the noise. This was it. He was going to make the discovery. Unfortunately, to Greg's great disappointment, it was just a deer that had made the rustling noise in the bushes. Greg didn't give up, though. He kept searching the forest all day long, but the creatures from his video were nowhere to be found. After a long day, he knew he'd have to give up, but would that be the end of it? Greg returned home feeling defeated and disappointed. He had no idea what was going on online all day while he'd been gone. Greg settled in at home and logged onto his social media. It was then that he knew that he'd made a big mistake. His inbox was filled with messages from strangers. Even his email was full. At first, he was excited by all the sudden interest in him and his project, but as he started to read the messages and go through the emails, he realized something else was going on, and it wasn't good. The tone of the emails was negative and urgent. Some of them were scientists who had contacted him. Some told him that he needed to get out there and get more proof while he had the time, while others told him he needed to drop the matter entirely. Some were even threatening. Greg didn't want any more attention, so he took down the video from his social media. He responded to a few of the scientists, hoping to get some answers. When he was done, he logged off of his computer and prepared to settle down for the night, but the drama was just beginning. Sirens could be heard in the distance. Greg hoped they were for someone else, but it soon became clear that they were coming to his house. He began to panic as they came closer and closer. He didn't know if maybe he should hide or try to run, but it was too late. They were here. The police infiltrated his home and arrested Greg on the spot. They took him to the station and interrogated him for hours. Greg had no idea why this was happening. And when the police finally realized that, they let him go. They told Greg no one was supposed to see those creatures. Greg promised to keep his mouth shut and delete all the footage. After this, Greg moved away but continued capturing beautiful landscapes.